The Central Division features a lot of great goalie play, some dominant performers, some guys who can be good sometimes, and some others who are hoping to put themselves into the elite conversation. So, where do the Minnesota Wild stack up? We discuss on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, this is Brandon Duham, and this is Locked on Wild.
Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you, as always, for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes throughout the course of the week. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we rank the goalie situation in the Central Division. We will identify the franchise goalies throughout this list, and we'll figure out where Filip Gustavsson slots in to either a franchise goalie or a good goalie. We'll rank everybody on today's show, which is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. The Central Division has some really good goalie play. You've got some guys that answer the bell almost every night. You have some guys who have been good and have also been wildly inconsistent. And you have some teams that are hoping that somebody will kind of catch fire and really take charge of their net situation. Now, the Minnesota Wilds are one of the teams near the top of these rankings because we saw Filip Gustavsson emerge, really take charge of the net this past season and really show that he is capable of being a well above average goalie in the NHL. You also have the experience of Marc-Andre Fleury, the expectation that we will see more of Gustafsson this year and fewer starts of Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, Dean Evason has said during the preseason, during training camp, that they are going to give both guys opportunities early on in the season. And then as the season goes along, who's playing well, who isn't, will factor into how the splits go the rest of the way. This is nothing new for the Minnesota Wilds. Over the past few seasons, we have seen them go really even splits to try to keep both goalies rested, to keep both guys fresh in the event that somebody gets hurt, in the event that somebody has a rough outing. They know that they're going to have an opportunity after a rough outing to kind of take a breather, refresh, decompress, and get back to it the following game. But I think the situation that the Wild are in now, it's fine if you want to more even the splits early on in the season as everybody gets acclimated to NHL speed, getting back up to game shape, things along those lines. But I think as we saw as the season wore on last year, that it's really a clear cut one and backup situation for Minnesota. Gustafsson was superb all season long. His numbers, in fact, got better as the season wore on. And for Marc-Andre Fleury, he had some great starts for this team, not trying to undercut him at all. He had some great starts for this team, but he also had some in which things kind of spiraled out of control. The Wild played much better with Filip Gustavsson in the net, and that kind of helps solidify that notion that Filip Gustavsson is the guy for this team. And so the big question, I think, will be, do we see him get a start share similar to some of the other upper echelon guys in this division? There are no shortage of top level names. Alexandar Georgiev had 62 starts last year. Connor Hellebuyck had 64. Jake Oettinger had 61. Juuse Saros had 63. Those guys all a ton of starts. Jordan Binnington had 60 for the St. Louis Blues. And then you look at where the Wild were at. Marc-Andre Fleury had 45, and Filip Gustavsson had the rest for the team, the 37, the rest of the way for the Minnesota Wild. So you have a lot of guys that are capable of starting on an almost every night basis. And with what we saw with Gustafsson this year, do they progress him towards being that bona fide number one guy? He's very capable of it, having gone toe to toe against some of the best teams in the NHL this past season, beating the New Jersey Devils twice, beating the Colorado Avalanche late in the season when the Wild took the opportunity to move into the outright first place spot in the Central Division. We know what happened after that with the Vegas Golden Knights, so we don't need to rehash it. But my point being is that Filip Gustavsson answered the bell every time the team had to try to snap a losing streak. We're having trouble scoring goals. Game one of the postseason, in which he outdueled Jake Oettinger to get a double overtime win. Those are the things that a number one goalie does. Anytime you hit the skids, anytime you're in a slump, anytime you simply need your guy to limit the opponent so that you can figure things out on the fly and come away with a 1-0 or 2-1 win, Filip Gustavsson did that every single time he was in the net. And so as we continue to watch Gustafsson's career unfold, you just start to add a little bit more to the workload as you go. And so 37 starts last year, if the coaching staff wants to keep things still pretty even, maybe you flip it. Maybe Gustafsson has between 45 and 50 starts. You see how he can handle that. Then next year, with Gustafsson still the guy and somebody else backing him up, whether it be Jesper Wallstedt or a bridge goalie for one season, whoever it ends up being, maybe then you add a little more to the plate to see if Gustafsson is capable of being somebody that is between, 55 and 60 starts. It would be nice, but as we've seen, just ask the Vegas Golden Knights how this worked out. Is you can't necessarily, you can have a number one and a backup, but you better have a capable backup. If you are the Tampa Bay Lightning and you lose Andrei Vasilevsky, the Lightning are scrambling this season to try to figure out their goalie situation with Vasilevsky now on the shelf for 8 to 10 weeks. You better have a capable backup that in the event that a goalie gets hurt, the Wild saw this a couple seasons ago when Cam Talbot got hurt and Kaapo Kähkönen slid in and won a ton of games in that rookie season that he had before he ended up being traded. The point being is that, yes, you can have a number one go-to guy, but you have to have a backup that's capable of playing and capable of stringing starts together if needed. And so we want to see a ton of Filip Gustavsson this season. Marc-Andre Fleury is a capable backup in the event that something happens to Gus Bus, that he gets hurt, that he needs a day, anything along those lines. And so the Wild's goalie situation heading into the season, yes, I know Fleury is another year older, so the concerns about if he's going to be able to continue to keep his level of performance where it's at without having a substantial drop-off, because if you are a goalie and you start to lose that reaction time and you start to just not be able to do the same things that you were previously doing in your career, all of a sudden you as a backup with the goals against average somewhere in the 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, all of a sudden your goals against average puffs up to 3.5, 3.6, 3.7. And then you start losing games, and things just go downhill from there. So there are concerns as to if Fleury can continue to keep up his level of performance. But if you take a few starts off his plate, give them to Filip Gustavsson, Gustavsson handles those well, then I think the goalie situation should be just fine for the Wild here this season. Now, where does the Wild's goalie situation stack up amongst the rest of the Central Division? We will rank them and see where Filip Gustavsson, for one, lines up against the rest of the starters in the Central Division. That is on the way as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. If you are a fan of the Minnesota Twins and you happen to check out the Game Time app for yesterday's postseason opener at Target Field, you probably noticed some crazy deals on tickets the day of the game. That's because Game Time gives you second to none opportunities to get great seats without having to plan so far ahead. We all have those horror stories of sporting events that we've gone to where the tickets are just through the nose with fees and with cost, or you get to the venue and you're sitting right behind a pillar or something that blocks your view. Game Time takes all of those problems and chucks them right out the window. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So make sure you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, we will take a look at the offense for tomorrow's episode of Locked on Wild. And programming note as well, hoping to have some new hardware that has been ordered and is on the way for tomorrow's episode. If not for sure on Thursday, I'll give you a hint. One part of it already arrived, and so just waiting for the rest. And for the non-YouTube crowd tuning in, I was just showing a mic stand, so that should give you a hint as to what is coming for hopefully tomorrow's episode, if not for sure on Thursday. So let's rank the Central Division goalies. And we'll just take a look at who we have, not in any particular order. In fact, I think I'm going to go in alphabetical order to start, and then we'll rank from there. The Arizona Coyotes will be carrying the combination of Kirill, Vejmelka, and Connor Ingram. Now, Vejmelka, kind of an up-and-comer for Arizona. He had some solid starts last season, and the Coyotes are certainly hoping that he takes a leap and continues to further his development to help a team that has some huge playoff aspirations for this year. If not this year, then within the next couple of years as well. So Vejmelka and Ingram in Arizona. For the Chicago Blackhawks, it's Peter Mrazek and Arvid Soderblom. Mrazek has bounced around the league a little bit, and Chicago is hoping that Soderblom can help out as well. For Chicago, it's a roster that's they're just trying to kind of find what they can put around Connor Bedard right now. I would not consider the goaltending situation a particular strength for Chicago heading into the season. Looking at the Colorado Avalanche, Alexandar Georgiev, and the potential backup of Justus Anunen, because Pavel Francouz is hurt. And so for the Avalanche, they get a ton of starts out of Georgiev. He started 60 games for the Avs last season, had 40 wins, and so obviously he's very capable of being a starting goalie, albeit a franchise goalie in the NHL. And so Colorado Going to get as many Georgiev starts as they can this year, but their backup situation is certainly in flux, to say the least. Let's go to the Dallas Stars. Jake Oettinger and Scott Wedgwood, same combination as last year. Oettinger, one of the up-and-coming goalies in this league, one of the young rising stars in the NHL. Obviously has a great team that plays in front of him, which certainly doesn't hurt as well, but he has certainly shown the ability to step up and win big games with the Stars since he was first called up. Other teams on the list. Let's go Winnipeg Jets, Connor Hellebuyck and Laurent Brossoit. Hellebuyck, a lot of questions with Hellebuyck this season as to if he's going to stay in Winnipeg or if he ends up getting traded at the deadline or just straight up walks. He could just straight up walk after the season is done too. So Winnipeg certainly has some things that they need to iron out. And Brossoit was with the Vegas Golden Knights last season before he got hurt. Had some good games. And so he is he's a little bit of an unknown, but I mean, depending on what is playing in front of him, a solid backup for the Winnipeg Jets. Of course, the Minnesota Wild, Filip Gustavsson, Marc-Andre Fleury, same combination as last year. Gus Bus, stock is up, and you got the old wily vet in Marc-Andre Fleury as well. Nashville Predators, Juuse Saros, one of the best goalies, not only in the division, but probably in the Western Conference as well, maybe the NHL too. And he really had to stand on his head for Nashville to even get close to a postseason spot last year. They barely snuck in. They were just anemic offensively at points. And Saros had to withstand just a constant barrage night in, night out to be able to get that team into the postseason. And then you have Kevin Lankinen as his backup. Again, guy who has bounced around a little bit. And so the hope there will be that, you can get a ton out of Saros and not necessarily have to rely on Lankinen all that much. And last but not least, Jordan Binnington in St. Louis. Binnington is as Jekyll and Hyde as goalie play can possibly be. One year he is fantastic. The next year he is trying to talk smack to the Minnesota Wild bench after giving up a fifth goal and then trying to fight Marc-Andre Fleury before the referees broke that up. The backup for the Blues, Joel Hofer, I know nothing about him. I'm going to be real honest there. And it's probably a situation in which it's, I would imagine, either a prospect or just a guy that they're filling that spot. Because, again, you're going to get like 60 starts from Binnington this year unless he gets hurt. So what's the point of paying a backup if you are just going to go with Binnington pretty much every game throughout the course of the season? So those are your goalies for the Central Division. Again, as I said at the top of the show, some franchise guys in here, some guys that are really, really good and hoping to ascend to that franchise category. Some names that the teams that they play for are hoping they will be able to kind of elevate their performance. So it's all over the place for the Central Division. Now, as far as rankings go, I'm just going to throw this out here and then I'll explain once I'm done. I actually went from a starter's perspective. I went Juuse Saros at 1, Jake Oettinger at 2, Connor Hellebuyck at 3, Filip Gustavsson at 4, Alexandar Georgiev at 5, Jordan Binnington at 6, Kirill Vejmelka at 7, and Peter Mrazek at 8. Mrazek, I think, is a clear-cut number 8. But honestly, these guys are all pretty close. I think Juuse Saros is definitely number 1. I think Jake Oettinger and Connor Hellebuyck are very close as your 2 or your 3. And at this point, I put Alexandar Georgiev and Filip Gustavsson basically in the same tier as younger guys who go to a new team. Their stories have basically mirrored each other almost identically. They are on one team, don't really have an opportunity on that particular team. Now, this is where the stories kind of are not identical, because for Georgiev, he was just in New York backing up Igor Shesterkin, one of the best goalies in the NHL. And so your situation there, if you are a potential starter, which we've seen that he is, you just don't have a ton of opportunity behind another guy who's going to start like 60 to 65 games a season. So he ended up getting traded from the Rangers over to Colorado. Colorado needed a starter after Darcy Kemper left to go to Washington. And Georgiev has rewarded this team with a ton of really, really good goalie play over the last couple of seasons. Same thing with Filip Gustavsson, except that with Gustavsson, it was more that the team in front of him was not rock solid. He had a handful of starts in a couple of seasons. One season was really good, one was not. And he comes to Minnesota, is able to be put into a team that has solid structure, and really has a plan that they attack on a nightly basis. And the results just are off the charts. And I want to make this clear that it's not as though Filip Gustavsson is like a system goalie, because there were some times in which some of the stuff that happened, especially defensively or just with players getting lost in front of the net, there were some games where the Wilds were getting thoroughly outplayed. Case in point, one of the games against the Dallas Stars in which the Wild won 3-2 in a shootout. Yes, the Wild did score a couple of goals, but thoroughly outplayed. And the only thing that really kept them in it was Filip Gustavsson. And so Gustavsson, I don't think, is a system QB. We talk in the NFL about system quarterbacks all the time, is that, hey, we just have a system we can run that makes this quarterback look really good. I don't think Gustafsson's a system goalie. And so it was just about him getting an opportunity to be the guy, and he just took it and ran with it. So I put him and Georgiev in the same category, but depending on what they do this season, and maybe it doesn't even need to be what they do this season, I think both guys are ascending the charts to where after maybe this season, unless something catastrophically goes wrong, then you put them into the franchise category as well. Now, beyond that, Jordan Binnington just is too inconsistent to be put in the top echelon of the rest of the goalies in the Central. And so he has to be behind everybody else because he had a terrible year this last year. And unless he has a really, really solid season, he has fallen off some after leading the Blues to the Stanley Cup. So I'm putting him in that position. Kirill Vejmelka, I think, has some intriguing upside, but look at the six guys in front of him. I don't think you're going to supplant any of those guys in these rankings. And then Peter Mrazek too, eighth. I mean, there's really no other spot to put him in these rankings. So there you have it. We've got Gustavsson at 4 of the 8, but again, those top 3 in front of him, Saros, Oettinger, and Hellebuyck, pretty darn good. So it's not as though he is fourth. It's not your traditional fourth place finish. He's like tied for second, something like that, where you have 1 and 1 and then 2 and 2. So he is definitely one of the better goalies in the division. It's just a matter of who else is in front of him the rest of the way. We will take a look at the backups. Plus, we'll also talk about the milestone that Mr. Marc-Andre Fleury will be chasing this season for the Minnesota Wild as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Swing into the NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. And if you want to pick up those bonus bets, the Minnesota Vikings play the Kansas City Chiefs this weekend. So a good spot to put that $5 bet would be the over between the Vikings and the Chiefs. Then you can use those bonus bets for player props, such as Justin Jefferson scoring a touchdown, Patrick Mahomes, the over on passing yards, you name it. You can go and bet on it with FanDuel. Make sure you visit fanduel.com/locked on to kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. With the season coming up, want to remind you that our plan is to, as many games as we can, we're going to try to hit a high number this year. We'll have a shorter episode pregame for you and a 15-ish minute postgame for you after pretty much every game. The post games will be interactive. I'll share my thoughts as to what happened during the game, and then we'll open it up to whatever the audience has to say about what we see out on the ice. So trying to make those interactive. We're also going to do some live streams throughout the season. We'll probably do one a week or so, just kind of hanging out and answering fan questions. They won't be treated necessarily as regular episodes. Just going to pop the mic on, and whoever wants to come in and ask some questions about the team, we'll have those as well. We have listened, Denny, to your requests for more interactivity this season, and we are happy to oblige in that regard. Backups, and I just got through saying that there are a ton of teams that don't really have a good one, but that if you end up suffering an injury to your starter, you're in a real bad situation, just like the Tampa Bay Lightning. And so looking at the backups for the rest of the division, I don't think there's really any scenario in which Marc-Andre Fleury is not the best backup amongst this group. I mean, we read the names. Kevin Lankinen, Fleury's better than him. Scott Wedgwood is not bad, but I would still say Fleury is better there. Laurent Brossoit, I probably still go Fleury there. Justus Anunen, if I'm pronouncing that right, I still lean Fleury there. Joel Hofer, I still lean Fleury. Connor Ingram, I still would lean Marc-Andre Fleury. Arvid Soderblom, I still would lean Marc-Andre Fleury. But again, for a lot of these teams, you're asking your goalie to spell your starter. And if you end up suffering an injury, you're probably in a world of hurt. For instance, Juuse Saros, if he gets hurt and you go to Kevin Lankinen for a 10 to 15 game stretch, that's a problem. Now, I think if the Wild had a situation like that, let's say Filip Gustavsson missed 10 games and you had to go to Marc-Andre Fleury for those 10. Now, depending on who they played, the Wilds could probably float at about 500 during that stretch. But the rest of these teams, like you lose your starter for 10, you're probably going 3-7, 2-8 during that stretch. But the Wilds have the ability to protect the goalies a little bit with the defense that they play. It's a nice kind of give and take between the defense and the goaltending. So while Fleury is the best backup, I mean, let's not forget that he's been a starter for a long time, a very long time. And so it's not like he is somebody that you signed off the scrap heap. So he's not a traditional backup, but he's going to be utilized in that role by this team, which, again, as I go back to the top of the show, I think if you take a few starts off of Fleury's plate, put them into Gustafsson's pile, that I think will help this goalie situation stay in the same area that it was this past season. So you're not going to have to worry about any sort of major step back that then puts huge pressure on your offense to try to accommodate for an uptick in goals allowed. This has been a team over the last few years that has had solid defense that has helped out the goaltending, and now you kind of flip it and you've got solid goaltending that can also help out the defense. So the Wild are in, I think, a good spot with Gustavsson as the starter. And if what has been said is true, that it will be more of a split to start the season, and then as things go on, starts will be handed out, based off of who is riding the hot hand, that kind of thing. I think we can look at Filip Gustavsson and what he did this past year, and he's more often than not, he's going to be the hot hand. There will be back-to-backs. There will be instances in which you still get Marc-Andre Fleury starts. For instance, let's talk about the start of the season. The Wild have the Florida Panthers at home. Then they go on the road to play the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then they play the Montreal Canadiens. If it's me, I go Gus Fleury. Give Fleury an opportunity against the Canadiens to get his season underway, and an opportunity to pick up a game on a young team that the Wild have had not a ton of trouble with over the last few years. And also keep in mind, Marc-Andre Fleury is 8 wins away from passing Patrick Waugh for second on the all-time list. And so if this is his final year in the league, there are going to be opportunities given to him to try to break that record. That's how it goes. And unless his performance majorly falls off, I would imagine he'll get it probably before the end of the year. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. But the goaltending situation, I think, is going to be solid for the Wild this season, with Filip Gustavsson leading the way. That will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Now that your first listen of the day is done, make sure that you check out our other preseason episodes over the last few days, and make sure to follow and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes as we get closer to the start of the season on October 12th. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.